associated with
The whole, where we left this off, right, was the fact that the way they make money, right, is based on an extractive world. There's no doubt about that. And indeed, they are very much into making money through industry, and our industries are not sustainable, right? And they have to deal with that because they're also into trying to be, supportive of workers and stuff like that. But they had to deal with the fact a major industry they had was Fagor, which made appliances, household appliances, right? And a significant part of their business was Spain, but they also, in order to have enough work, were exporting, just like all of the other appliance makers do, right? Well, they, of course, had to deal with the pressure of globalization, with the fact that some people were quite willing to go ahead and make those appliances and not pay people anything, So they had to compete with that. They still were competing. And then their recession happened, and their recession was a direct result of a huge housing bubble. I mean, when it happened, there was just amazing amounts of properties that were empty. Same thing. Well, when you have a crash in the housing, what happens to the sale of appliances? So they were hurting really bad, right? But the people in that business wanted solidarity because they had been putting their 30% into that business for all this time, right? They had their 15,000 plus all their other capital. And they kind of count that Mondragon would take care of them as far as work goes, or early retirement or training or whatever. They weren't worried about that, but they wanted to save their investment. When they were in trouble, right? Mondragon, as a network of cooperatives, had $187 million in reserve, right? And they went through this ongoing discussion about what to do, and this ongoing struggle about we should shut this down. It's losing, we can't turn it around. But then the pressure from the employees to keep it going. They took it down to 51 million before they finally said, got to do it. And when I heard that had crashed, I thought, oh my God, they're going to go under. They're nowhere near gone under. They just couldn't keep doing this one, now globalized, can't compete with the industry, But I think, Dan, there were, I guess, a few people still that were being trained that hadn't gotten jobs, but it was like less than 50, right?
I don't remember the details. I think it was like you've got a 2-year period after.
At 80% of your wage. Yeah.
At 80% of your wage, and if you can't find a job within another Mondragon cooperative within that 2 years, then you go back to training for a more relevant job. So that's how they would shut down. That's the first and only time that they had to shut down one of their cooperatives.
And it was their biggest one. But it was like, was it 2,000 or 5,000 employees? It was a lot of employees, I know that.
Yeah, it was their biggest one.
Yeah, but they basically, when we were there were 50 people that wanted jobs that didn't have jobs, and they were in training, or less than 50. So they did early retirement, of course. But when 2008 happened too, they laid nobody off. But people cut hours. They just did all, they took pay cuts. They were in solidarity, Nobody was like, oh, well, I'm okay. Sorry, you're having a hard time. Like, we're all having a hard time, So that's the way they do it. It's about solidarity, It's about, like, coming to agreements, and that's not what I had at the collective restaurant I worked at. Most people weren't there for solidarity. They were there because it was a good paying job and there were benefits, And they had their own agendas, If we were lucky, that agenda didn't mean ripping us off, So that's the difference, and that's what we're hoping we can inspire people to create here. So I got to rush through the rest of this, and I'm going to do that. So a piece I've been not talking about that's critical, and I had this described. Last night I was listening to the tapes I made, or the recordings I made on my phone. I could get about every third word between the language difference and the echoes and whatever. But I did get this piece, which was pretty good. They were describing, just a theoretical. You're working, right, and you have got a, social engagement, something that matters to your family to go home to that night, right? And your supervisor comes around and says, "I need you to work overtime." "I don't want to. I got to go." It's like, this customer really needs it. We can't not, we can't not deliver to this customer. They could lean on you and make you stay, and they could do that 2 or 3 times. That's about all they can do, though, because there's a social council. If it keeps happening, it goes to the social council. And the social council, so there's not only the management, but there's also this other body which is about the well-being of the workers on all levels, you know, and a place for the workers to take it up. And this is interesting. I don't know how far you got in the book, but it's like, you know, it's evolved over time. And like, there's been like, you know, problems because, of course, the managerial council, right, that's like to get the work done and make the money. The social council is just to make sure the workers are happy. Well, there's not money coming from that. So the people on the social council didn't get paid and didn't get as much time, you know, and over time that's like, you know, gotten better. But it's an ongoing thing, you know, and it's an ongoing thing what the social council does. You know, it had a much more limited set of things to do when they first started out, and it's gotten broader as they've looked at what do we need to make sure that this is good work and that, you know, the workers are, you know, actually being able to get redress. You know, it's not like you can just go in and vote on everything. You vote once a year and then you just take direction, you know. This is not workers' self-management, you know, per se, though there is indeed many example of them looking at working situations and saying, we want to get rid of Taylorism. Everybody know what I mean by Taylorism? Taylorism, there's a guy named Taylor who back when Henry Ford was first starting to make cars, he figured out the whole assembly line thing. And that's what Henry Ford took on, and that's where all of our, you know, assembly line stuff comes from. This one guy, Taylor, who figured out, you know, exactly how much each person should do and how quickly it should move down the line and all that. And they actually looked at all that and talked to each other and said, you know, we don't need to do it this way. You know, this is incredibly boring and alienating. And so they, you know, I don't know how far they've gotten. We didn't really get to hear much about that, I don't think. But they redid some businesses. They took the assembly lines out and set up work tables. And people did the whole thing. It was vertical once again. Rather than, you know, just doing, you know, one piece, people made the whole thing. And what they found was that then people were invested in the whole process. They then related to the production people who were making the parts, you know. They troubleshot stuff. When stuff didn't work, they wanted to see why, you know. It carried on, and indeed, they were way less alienated. And in the end, they were just as fast, if not faster, you know, because they worked as a team. You know, there were teams, and you know, everybody on that team did everything, you know, so they, you know, it switched around. You didn't do the same thing, and then everybody had a chance to innovate. You know, if everybody's involved in every piece, then you can constantly innovate, you know. So, and that, you know, happened in a dialogue with the social council. The social council at first didn't even want to deal with that. It's like, oh, we can't do that, you know. But the managers said, well, we need you to be part of it, you know. And I don't know, because of the dislocations, I don't know, you know, how much of that, how much that's going forward. Because they have had to struggle. They've managed to not lay people off. They've managed to keep growing. But it hasn't been an easy world for anybody who is in production. You know, there's the forces of globalization. There's a, you know, the collapse of credit. There's been a lot of different reasons why, you know, it hasn't been dealt with. And indeed, Dan and I both, you know, looked at what they were doing and looked at what they were choosing to do and the choices they're making, and we both said, we don't see a lot of innovation towards, you know, what now is the Green New Deal in America, you know, like that. There's not, they really are still about like, you know, where are the jobs, and we'll go where the jobs are, rather than we want to move the economy where it needs to be, you know. There was, you know, at the research and development place, they had just found an industrial kind of composting vessel that they got from, was it China? Is that where they got? I forget where they, yeah, that they got from China, but they actually, you know, had taken into their research and development and created a product, and they were selling it like to various municipalities and stuff. So that was a technology that worked, but they had tried to go into solar and biogas. Wasn't the two things?
Yeah, I don't know if they've launched anything on biogas.
Well, they basically, what they said was they developed it, but they didn't get the market. You know, they didn't know how to access the market. And that has a lot to do, you know, I would guess that we would have a better idea of how to access the market, you know, because that's where we are. But we're not at the, how do we make money and create jobs, create wealth, you know, get control of capital so that it serves us. We're all about like, you know, how do we take care of this little piece and that little piece and help make it so that it all comes together at some point. They've got it together now. They've got to learn how to get those little pieces and move in that direction, you know. And indeed, at the end, I said under, you know, this, you know, it's like, it's north, you know, if you fly, you know, you're flying from Newfoundland to there, you know, I mean, they're actually north, but they're pretty warm because of the Gulf Stream. And I said, Under, have you been following the news about the Gulf Stream slowing down? And he said, no. Do you think anybody's doing anything about that in Mondragon, planning for it? And he said, no. And I said, I worry for our world, And, we'll see, hopefully they will. Hopefully there'll be some, social council meeting or something where they'll deal with that, They tend to take things as they come to them. After the democracy came, after Franco was gone, there were all these unions and political groups, and they hadn't had to deal with that before. And they didn't say, oh, well, we're not going to let you in because you're going to cause problems and stuff. They had all these meetings. They created all these ways that they could. They created a special person. So every political party or labor union had a representative at every, they picked one person to be the representative. And then it turned out that none of the representatives really did anything and nobody cared about them because everybody realized that any of them could go talk. They didn't need to do it. And indeed, the unions and the political parties never really had an impact there because they already had a cohesive way to get done what needed to be done and figure out what wasn't right and how to talk to each other, But they keep, figuring out how to deal with whatever comes down. So at some point, I'm hoping that, maybe all the students not going to school, maybe Megan, was that her name? The young girl that spoke at the Greta. Maybe Greta will get through to them, I'm hoping, I'm hoping for that one. Okay, so they have a retail segment, right? And they're Eroski is the name for they also have travel agencies called Eroski, they go wherever they can, right? But their retail thing, right, is bigger than the Super Walmart, their store, right? In Mondragon, in that town, right? I just couldn't believe how big it was, right? It's the exact reverse of Walmart. Walmart has a fair amount of groceries and tons of crap. They've got tons of vegetables, gorgeous vegetables and really good food and all that, right? Fair amount organic, but not all organic by any means, right? And then, not crap, but maybe, you think about 30% appliances and stuff? Yeah, And this is like one of 350 stores, right? They have 2 million members in their cooperative, right? They have governance by the workers and the consumers, 50-50 on the governing board, but the chairperson of the board, who can break the vote, is always a consumer. Which makes sense because they got to make sure that they stay in business, so the consumers have to, yeah, the workers have to be taken care of, but if you lose your consumers, is what happened to the stores in Berkeley. The stores in Berkeley just got left behind. They were just old-fashioned supermarkets when everybody in Berkeley wanted, what now is Whole Food. This is before Whole Food was big, but people were looking for those kind of stores. In the Basque region in Mondragon, that probably wouldn't have happened because the consumers would have been saying, these stores don't cut it, and they would have gotten it, So they have that. It's pretty impressive, and indeed, it's also impressive that the chairperson of that incredibly big thing, that's not her full-time job. She gets paid for some hours on that, but she's a teacher too. Talk about industrious. Boy, these people are industrious.
What's the name of the store?
Eroski, Eroski. Yeah. Diane has a shopping bag I bought her. Okay, so their primary structure is an assembly. They have these workers' assemblies, and that's where they pick their managers. And once they got their managers, they got them. And indeed, lots of times those managers are there for a long time. The original managers were pivotal, to the growth, and they were incredibly, and indeed, one of the managers, he had to take over human relations for half a year. In that time, he turned human relations around, because he took it seriously. He read everything he could, and he came to the social councils and, said, we should be doing this and that. We should be doing more, So they're really good at, training, but also getting the people that want to be trained and have the skills to get there, And meanwhile, they're not undervaluing, by and large, nobody makes more than 6 times what, except for these few super brains, super skill sets. And part of why it's so hard to get fired, I think, is Ander made this point to me. He said, we're just a different world. I get up in the morning and I know that my mom is, 300 yards down the road, and my brother is 3 blocks over there, and this other member of the family is like, half a mile from there. I've had people come here and talk about their family, and they're talking in terms of 600 miles or, 1,000 miles. We are much more separate. And indeed, when we were talking about the housing, and Dan was saying that everybody can walk where they go, part of that culture too is that they're not an alienated society. And that's Spain in general. The public life in Spain is major. One of the recordings I have is of the celebration at 1 in the morning when they won a major soccer game. And that we watched them watching that soccer game in the town square at, was it midnight or 11 o'clock or something, with all their kids, And we went to eat at a Chinese restaurant, at 11:30 or something, and bunches of kids and families came in, having a big meal. The kids are in their soccer uniforms at 11 o'clock at night, And they stay up late, but they're always out there. There's so much more just human interaction, and that makes it easier to deal with whatever it takes to not fire somebody, and you're committed to not firing somebody because you know that person's brother, you know that person's mother, You don't just say, oh, there's another disposable person. We really have a big thing about disposable people in America, You're a problem, you're gone, We don't have to deal with you.
No accountability.
There isn't not deal with people, I'm afraid that's how we get the mass shootings and stuff, I think we need to deal with everybody, I think that's about all I have to do here. I do have a slide, yeah.
How many hours do people work? What is the expectation?
I think it was less than 40, wasn't it?
I doubt that. They seem like they work a lot. I'd say they're really productive. No, but then they definitely
Maybe it was less than 40 during the crisis. That's what it was in 2000.
Oh.
That's right. They cut hours for that. Yeah. No, they seem like they probably work about as much as
we do. Well, but they have much, like the rest of Europe, they have much more time off.
Their time off. It's a little more public.
And they, of course, they've got serious leave for newborn, for mothers of newborns and for the fathers and stuff too. They have a real social safety net. They're investing in their people.
They have to know about their cooperative, so in their assemblies they can vote. So they have to learn about their cooperative, so they can make their vote in the end of the year, right?
When I asked about the education stuff, they said it's just, you just absorb it, They don't really have these, the education wasn't getting it started. The Ars Mendi, the sopping wet thing, that was the education, Now it's just the culture.
They know financial.
Oh, they've got, there's also, a segment that takes care of the financial stuff, and every business gets audited. They're not slack on any of that. They're very, very, very businesslike, Yeah.
I don't know a lot about it, but are you familiar with Ubuntu and Michael Tellinger?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not, no. And indeed, I don't have time to talk about it now, but there's another book here. We left there and we went to southern Spain, Andalusia, and there's another example. This is a whole village, landless peasants, landless peasants starving. They were seasonal workers. They only got work when they were needed for harvesting. This mayor shamed the government, to hunger strikes and all kinds of other things, incredibly creative. He's been mayor for 25 years. They now have, I think it's 1,200 hectares, which is like 2,400 acres or more. They grow the most labor-intensive crops. They process them themselves from literally starving most of the year, right? But doing mutual aid even then. They still had the mutual aid part. Andalusia was an incredibly radical province, incredibly poor. They now make twice the Spanish minimum wage, So there's more than one model. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, great.